So I'm sitting on the internet.com looking for things to get angry at, looking for video topics so that I can push ads in those video topics, because that's what I do. I sell ads to you guys right here on the internet.com. Make no mistake about it. I am Shill Sean, henceforth from this day forward. When PSA Sitch sent me this gift, this absolute gem of a video of Joy Reid complaining about a stand your ground proposal in the state of Missouri, where she compares it to, among other things, the Fugitive Slave Act. Yeah, self-defense laws are now the equivalent of returning slaves to their owners in the 1800s. But before we get into that, I am a shill. I have to sell you ads. Let's go to our sponsor. I believe it is Stay Winter Warm. A ton of Americans last month were talking about how their heating bills were up almost $100. This is largely due to the fact that natural gas heating is up 32% this winter as compared to last winter, and heating oil ain't doing much better. This is one of the reasons why I highly recommend Stay Winter Warm. You can get yourself a little mini space heater that's absolutely perfect for small rooms or to supplement your heat. We all got those drafty rooms in our households, and it doesn't make sense to crank up the thermostat for every room in the household just to get that one to the temperature where it's comfortable. Go to staywinterwarm.com right now and you can get yourself 50% off this heater. Don't know about you, but I'm not looking forward to lining the pockets of the utility companies this winter, and you shouldn't be either.
This is one of the most offensive pieces of legislation I have ever seen in my life. It's a personal attack on me. It's a personal attack on people who look like me. I try to think of words to describe it, and the only word I can come up in my mind is this bill is complete bull.
Personal attack on people who look like you? Bro, I wear glasses and I'm not threatened by this law at all whatsoever. What's that? Oh, he was making a racial point. Of course he was making a racial point. He's a guy that's being played on Joy Reid show. Okay, we gotta roll into the clip. We gotta talk about this. Just wait. It's gonna be good. Top tier, first class all the way. What's that chef's kiss? Chef's kiss moment.
Well said. Kyle Rittenhouse, Travis McMichael, George Zimmerman. All three men claimed self-defense during their trials for the murder of innocent people, many of them black men, or in Zimmerman's case, a teenager.
So two things you need to understand, and first and foremost, it is that those three people do not belong in the same category. Different states, different applications of laws, completely different circumstances that connected all those crimes in Joy Reid's head. All she focused on was white perpetrator, but she also says many of them were black. Two of them were black. Two of the people who died were white. Kyle Rittenhouse killed white people. The idea that you're going to try to throw that out in the ether and say many of these people were black and Trayvon Martin was just a little boy. He was 17 years old, technically a minor, the same age as Kyle Rittenhouse, but he was just a little boy. Even though Kyle Rittenhouse is a murderous, racist man, just a little boy. Also, I do want to point out that the McMichael trial resulted in a conviction. We covered it on this channel. And in the state of Georgia, you have no duty to flee and very good self-defense protections. Pretty good comparatively, not as good as a bunch of other states, but pretty good. So already, her cases don't make a lot of sense because the McMichael's case resulted in a conviction, and I guess the only through line is that all of them resulted in a self-defense defense, but not all of them resulted in a not guilty verdict. On top of that, the Kyle Rittenhouse case was so obviously self-defense. This is probably justification for a law that they're going to tell you about momentarily.
A new bill being debated in Missouri would not only call those murders justified, but would prohibit police from even detaining those suspected of violence, as long as they claim self-defense. What's being dubbed by opponents as the Make Murder Legal Act would strengthen existing self-defense laws in the state by putting the burden of proof on prosecutors to disprove self-defense claims, something very difficult to do in cases where the only witness to a heinous crime could be the person who was killed.
So first of all, this is a dramatic over-exaggeration. This is a dramatic oversimplification of what is being proposed in the law. And there's a reason that I pointed to the Kyle Rittenhouse case among all the cases, because that is going to be very determinative of what we're actually going to talk about. You see, self-defense protections exist. They exist in the nation. I know Joy Reid doesn't like that. I know that bothers Joy Reid to no end, but you are allowed to defend yourself from deadly force. And in some states, you don't even have a duty to retreat. In New York, you do have to retreat. If you don't exhaust all possible options, even in a straight up scenario, you can be charged with murder or aggravated assault or similar if you defend yourself using physical force or deadly force against somebody. So the states that do have a sensible self-defense law that don't require you, the victim, to run away before trying to defend yourself also run into the problem from time to time of overzealous prosecutors, because even if you have a clean self-defense, even if you're 100% justified, even if, like the Kyle Rittenhouse case, it is obviously captured on video and everybody knows the circumstances 15 minutes after, an overzealous prosecutor, political considerations, and a bunch of other factors can lead to you being arrested, held in jail, charged, and actually subjected to a trial, even though there's no chance of conviction. And if you're not a prominent case like Kyle Rittenhouse, what ultimately could end up happening is you can't afford a lawyer, you don't feel like you're adequately able to defend yourself, so you end up copying a plea deal on what should be a legitimate self-defense case. So what this law says is that if there's not probable cause that it's not self-defense, they can't just arrest you for the sake of it and then put you through that whole ordeal when you're exercising your rights of lawful self-defense. It does not prioritize the criminal over the one defending themselves. A bunch of states have this, and murder has not run wild in any of the states that do have this. On top of that, the state of Florida specifically has this, and in the state of Florida, this is what is known as a stand your ground hearing, which is a pre-trial hearing where you can show up, actually make your case, and the judge can dismiss the charges. You don't need a lawyer in that scenario. Now, the reason I'm highlighting the Florida situation specifically is because George Zimmerman, the whole thing with Trayvon Martin, took place in the state of Florida. They had this stand your ground protection, this extra on top of everything stand your ground protection, and this was not utilized by Zimmerman nor his defense team during the course of the trial over the killing of Trayvon Martin. And the reason why is because these laws are not written in such a way that they make murder legal. They're written in a way for obvious self-defense cases against overzealous prosecutors. The Zimmerman case was actually a case that needed to be adjudicated, so they actually had to go to trial, and they didn't even think it was worth their time to go to a stand your ground hearing. That's how not obvious the case was based on the parameters. So Joy Reid is way overstating it, and the examples that she put forward completely contradict the points that she's trying to make.
Read a little bit of this law. There's a provision of this new proposed law, which perhaps appropriately is Bill number 666. A person who uses or threatens to use force is justified in such conduct and is immune from criminal prosecution and civil action for the use or threatened use of such force.
I don't know if you guys know this, but I'm smarter than your average bear. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this, but there's a 10,000 IQ located up in this head. So when I saw Joy Reid reading this sentence, I thought it was a little bit odd. And one of the things that I thought was odd about this sentence was the ... there before they transitioned to is justified. Because it looks like Joy Reid is reading that if a person uses force is justified, and that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I actually did the extra work, looked up the bill, Bill 666 by the way, the only thing appropriate about it, and read over the part that is cut out in the ... And what I found out is that not only are there parts missing, but the text is actually altered for this MSNBC segment. Now I'm going to go to the exact same sentence. By the way, I will link the bill in full. You can use a keyword search so you could find that this is the only place in this one-page bill where a sentence starts. It is actually not the start of the sentence. She starts from the middle, also very deceptive, with a person. So we're going to read that, and I want you to know what Joy Reid just tried to pull on you. A person who uses or threatens use of force in self-defense, that part oddly missing, is immune from criminal prosecution, not is justified. Again, that's narrative language being added in by Joy Reid because she's trying to say that this justifies violence against minorities from criminal prosecution and civil action for the use of such force, unless such force was used against a law enforcement officer who is acting in performance of his or her official duties, and the person reasonably knew or should have known the person was a law enforcement officer. Now, the reason I read past where Joy Reid read past is because I stopped the clip before Joy Reid continued on to the next sentence. I read the unless law enforcement officer part because Joy Reid continues on to that next part and starts talking about a law enforcement officer, thus confirming that we are in the same page, the same paragraph, talking about the same sentence in which somebody at MSNBC decided to cut out the self-defense thing, add in the word justified, and gobbledygook the language in a multiple different ways on this page. So Joy Reid, very deceptive in what she's doing right there on the video in her own show, can't fact check the bills and doesn't expect people in the audience to actually go and look them up, even though she says it's Bill 666 in the state of Missouri. Even though the bill is 1 page long, she doesn't think anybody in her audience will notice if she just lies, removes some self-defense language, adds in the word justified, and then goes on her racist rant. So I just want you to know we're starting off foundationally with the lie coming out of the face of Joy Reid, and everybody at MSNBC should be ashamed because they have entire editorial boards, they have people behind this, they have researchers, people employed on staff, and it took me 5 seconds to find the actual statute.
Unless this person against whom force was used or threatened is a law enforcement officer who was acting in the performance of his or her official duties and the officer identified himself or herself. So you can theoretically kill an undercover police officer too if they don't identify themselves, but police are excused.
So Joy Reid, being the hack, fraud, race grifter that she is, mentions that the police are immune, but only if they identify themselves, and her example of how this is bad for police officers, or what this provision entails, is that undercover police officers can be killed by people with guns just randomly, and then they can claim self-defense. But here's the thing. I'm actually aware of Black Lives Matter, probably a bit more so than Joy Reid, who just reads off a teleprompter and doesn't have individual thoughts of her own. So I know for a fact that this specific provision in there about identifying an officer is actually meant to protect people who are subject to no-knock warrants, who react on a visceral level to somebody barging into their door and may kill a police officer. There's actually a very famous case, I believe it was in Missouri, but I could be wrong, where they broke down the door of somebody, and this was actually the wrong house, and this guy grabbed his shotgun, went into his child's bedroom, and fired upon an officer as he entered the child's bedroom. He was arrested, charged, convicted, and then ultimately upon appeal, they realized this was a clear-cut case of self-defense, and it wasn't even his address on the warrant, and the police did not follow their proper procedures in this scenario. So, this is what this is for. This is actually a protection for citizens, and Joy Reid, who probably did something about the Amir Locke case, would say, yes, this is great. Amir Locke has the same self-defense rights as everybody else. Well, congratulations, Joy Reid. In the state of Missouri, they're actually trying to guarantee those rights in law, and you're coming out against it.
As expected, Mark McCloskey, who's running for the open Missouri Senate seat, praised the bill because it means that he essentially and his wife could have been in their slippers and shoot every single Black Lives Matter person that walked by legally. Shoot every single Black Lives Matter person that walked by legally.
So after Joy Reid butchers the law, after somebody in her production staff or maybe her deliberately removes self-defense language, remove the immune from prosecution, add in some justification, change it up to make it sound worse than it actually is, she then talks about how the McCloskeys are supporting this legislation, because according to her, this would mean that the McCloskeys could have killed all the Black Lives Matter rioters because that's what they want to do. Need I point out that the McCloskeys, or at least the man in the McCloskey marriage, is actually a defense attorney, and he's a defense attorney in St. Louis. You know who he's representing all the time? Black people. Need I also point out that these people were not legally allowed to be where they were. They had broken into a private gated community, and on top of that, the McCloskeys did not fire upon these people. They brought out their guns to deter people who were rioting from destroying their property that they had spent decades restoring. So everything Joy Reid just said about that was completely wrong. On top of that, the McCloskeys' prosecution was ridiculous in every way. They were actually convicted. They ultimately ended up getting pardoned later because the leftist, Shaun King-backed, and George Soros-funded district attorney went after them, prioritized them based on the false narrative that Joy Reid is putting forward. And I believe they pled guilty. I know somebody's going to say, they weren't convicted, they pled guilty. Listen, a guilty plea is a conviction. You are pleading guilt. That's the same thing legally in terms of your guilt, not guilt, as being found guilty at trial. And what makes this even more offensive, what makes this even more ridiculous, is that Kimberly Gardner, who threw the book at the McCloskeys, who targeted them based on political leanings, based on the fact that she wanted to make a stand with the rioters, with the people who were killing people in the streets of St. Louis, actually was not even bothering at the same time to send lawyers to show up for murder trials, causing the charges against actual murderers to be dismissed, but she had time to go after the McClaskeys. So what this is doing is saying overzealous prosecutors like Kimberly Gardner, people who are derelict in their duty, we're not going to stand for your nonsense. Maybe if we were in a situation, like we were 10, 15 years ago, where prosecutors were elected to put murderers away rather than to do political grandstanding, we wouldn't need a law like this, but apparently we do because of prosecutors like Kim Gardner, who I'm sure Joy Reid supports.
And what does it mean in your view, particularly for Black Missourians?
Joy, I'm so glad you reminded us that the McClaskeys were front row and center to testify on behalf of passing this bill. This was, of course, the couple that was made famous by stepping outside of their restricted covenant mansion in St. Louis, Glocks in tow, pulling their guns out on unarmed Black protesters.
So what's great about this is that she's talking about their mansion. Oh, they had a mansion. First of all, they bought an old home with money they earned, by the way. One of them was a defense attorney defending mostly Black people from criminal charges, and they wanted to restore it, so they probably didn't spend that much money on it. I'm sure Joy Reid lives in a more expensive place. I'm sure this woman lives in a more expensive place. On top of that, they don't have any criticisms for the Black Lives Matter founders like Patrisse Cullors, who owns 4 mansions in exclusive white areas. I didn't see them do a story about how Black Lives Matter actually transferred money to Patrisse Cullors' wife's organization in Canada so that they could buy a mansion, which was the former headquarters of the Communist Party of Canada, for over $6 million. None of that matters in terms of houses or anything like that, but the McClaskeys defending their houses when somebody breaches a private area, rioters breach a private area, rioters who had killed people specifically in St. Louis, who had destroyed the city, who had destroyed downtown. No, that's the problem. Also, she says Glocks in hand. One of them had a revolver, one of them had a rifle. I don't even know anything about guns, and I know that that's not a Glock. What's wrong with you? Not every gun is a Glock. Get out of here. You're inaccurate. You're more inaccurate than Joy Reid's reading of that legislation.
Pulling their guns out on unarmed Black protesters.
Also, I object to the notion that they were unarmed Black protesters. We don't know that. We don't know what was on any of these people, considering there were some unarmed Black protesters that were looting a pawn shop, one ultimately murdering David Dorn. I'm not going to take your word for that. These mostly peaceful, unarmed protesters who broke into this area and were trying to go to the mayor's house. Not buying it, not having it. Get out of here. Also, there's a giant mob of them, so do they really need weapons if they all attack at once? Obviously, you need a deterrent for that, and by the way, that behavior was in fact deterred. These people did not attack the property. Mission accomplished. Nobody got hurt. That's the purpose of the gun. Even though you don't need to fire it, it can work as a deterrent effect.
Of course, to people like the McClaskeys, Black skin is weapon enough, and this is precisely the problem. This is exactly what this bill is designed to do.
So unsurprisingly, or shockingly, if you're a follower of Joy Reid, that was completely inaccurate. That is not true. There's nothing in the law at all whatsoever that relates to Black skin or seeing Black people as a threat. Also, it's really funny how they're worried about white people killing Black people. Statistically, one of the least likely things to happen in this nation. I call this like the double unicorn, because interracial killings are super rare, but if they were to happen, it's something like 10 times more likely that Blacks would kill whites than whites would kill Blacks. So there's nothing in this that is based in reality. On top of that, because Black people kill the most and they kill Black people the most, you would think that self-defense protections would actually disproportionately benefit Black people. By the way, this is actually true. Black people use self-defense proportionally more than anybody else, and they use it against other Black people. This is what the law is for. You know who's disadvantaged, maybe can't afford lawyers, maybe sometimes ends up in situations where they have to plead guilty rather than go to trial in order to face a longer sentence? Black people. So this protection would probably disproportionately protect them, but Joy Reid and none of these people at MSNBC want to talk about that because they're against fundamentally your right to defend yourself.
It's to legitimize seeing Blackness as a weapon in and of itself and then justify our murders. It is meant to terrorize us and frighten us away from ever using our voices. I also want to set the proper historical context because back in the day, by 1950, Missouri had the second highest number of lynchings outside of the Deep South. So when folks talk about making America great again, that's the kind of Missouri grand old tradition that they want to return to. They want to return to days when you could lynch or murder Black folks and there would be absolutely no retribution for it. That's not hyperbole. I'm telling you, as a Black Missourian and as a protester, that is reality.
Now, if you had a comparison to racist lynchings in your bingo card, please see the attendant right now and you can cash your check. Congratulations, you won out there if that was on your list of things that would be said. Now, unsurprisingly, this comparison happened. Unsurprisingly, it is ridiculous in every way. Self-defense, defending yourself from an active threat, is not the equivalent of you going out seeking out somebody for retribution and killing them. On top of that, this needs to be said, go look at the lynching statistics in the United States of America. Go look at them by race. What you'll find out is that in our deep racist history in this country, 3,000 or so Black people were lynched. Total. Completely. That's it. By white people. 3,000. You want to know why? Because public executions were a thing that happened in the United States of America and in basically every part of the world. So it's not that many. The association with Black people, the association of even a rope with Black people is a very modern invention because this was the normal punishment for somebody, and this is due in large part, and I'm not blind to this, some very prominent instances where the victim of the lynching happened to be a Black person. But the vast majority of them were just normal public executions, which would seem unbelievably barbaric to us today, but that was the norm, and we need to kind of disassociate this as an exclusively white person versus Black person thing. That's just not the case. By the way, they're horribly brutal. If you look into what actually went on in lynchings, let me be clear about it. The rope is the least of the brutal part of it. So let's be honest about the history of it, but let's also be more honest and talk about how this was public execution thing.
And I can't get around that. I mean, if this is Fugitive Slave Act territory, I'm sorry, Paul. This is essentially legalizing lynching, as Brittany said. I don't see how it's anything other than that. And couple that with trying to neuter and castrate the feds. Here's another piece of this. New York Times reports, in 2021, Missouri passed a law that prevents local law enforcement from even working with federal agents on gun cases.
Yeah. That just happened. This is Fugitive Slave Act territory. I don't know how any other way to describe it other than they're legalizing lynchings. On top of that, they're also trying to neuter the feds. Funny that you would mention the feds in the same sentence as the Fugitive Slave Act and talk about how Missouri's bad for trying to nullify some federal laws, which is what she's going to lead into, because, of course, the Fugitive Slave Act was famously nullified by the state of Massachusetts because they did not want to enforce this federal law.
And imposes a $50,000 penalty on any local sheriff's office or police department that tries to enforce federal firearms laws instead of abiding by less restrictive state statutes. So what they're saying is local law enforcement can't even talk to the feds about gun crimes, but you can shoot and kill anyone you like and just say self-defense and you're good.
So what Joy Reid said is incredibly stupid and wrong in every possible way, except for her main goal, which was to say the word slavery in connection with this law, so that her audience could be like, wow, what racist, Fugitive Slave Act even. They're even trying to nullify the feds. The feds would never do Fugitive Slave Act even. Joy Reid awesome.
And couple that with trying to neuter and castrate the feds. Here's another piece of this. New York Times reports, in 2021, Missouri passed a law that prevents local law enforcement from even working with federal agents on gun cases.
So this is an unrelated piece of legislation. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about in terms of self-defense, but it goes to show what the actual problem that Joy Reid and all these people have with this legislation is, and that is gun rights.
Local law enforcement can't even talk to the feds about gun crimes, but you can shoot and kill anyone you like and just say self-defense and you're good.
Also, I noticed another deception in there among many of the lies and deceptions in this video, and that is Joy Reid talking about how they're not allowed to talk to the feds about gun crimes. No, that is not what is going on. That is nonsensical. You are just wrong. The law specifically forbids police departments that are agents of the state or the municipalities from being co-opted by the feds in order to enforce laws that run contrary to the state of Missouri. Again, ironically, the Fugitive Slave Act comparison of local law enforcement not enforcing a federal law is totally lost on Joy Reid, who just brought up the Fugitive Slave Act. Not included in this, because the feds are not investigating day-to-day gun crimes, are shootings, murders, robberies, anything involving a gun that the feds don't have jurisdiction over. So this is completely nonsensical. This is all about federal gun laws, which, by the way, after the Obama administration initiated Operation Choke Point, where they would use information about federal firearms dealerships to deny them bank accounts, this is a needed protection because the government, especially the Democratic Party, don't respect the Second Amendment right, and they will use outsized means in order to get around it and undermine those who are selling the weapons legally, even with the federal firearms license. So Joy Reid, you're just incorrect in every way. You're wrong. You don't know what you're talking about, and you're being incredibly dishonest. But then again, you just compared this to the Fugitive Slave Act, so how can you be trusted on anything?
Yeah, this is like a stand your ground law on steroids, and it's like a gun rights for nuts law on steroids.
I get it. It's stand your ground on steroids. It's a gun rights law on steroids. Yes, you love the on steroids analogy. Can we get to your point? Or are you just going to talk very slowly about what you think this is?
It would allow murderers to go free and empower trigger-happy vigilantes like the McCloskeys and like Kyle Rittenhouse to shoot up Black Lives Matters protests.
It does not empower vigilantes. Again, you talked about the use of force and you cut out the word self-defense from the law in your reading of it, so you're trying to get away with this. It's specifically in reference to self-defense. On top of that, this guy refers to the McCloskeys and Kyle Rittenhouse as trigger-happy.
It would allow murderers to go free and empower trigger-happy vigilantes like the McCloskeys and like Kyle Rittenhouse.
The McCloskeys legitimately didn't fire the gun. I believe that the gun that the wife was holding was actually not operational. That's what they determined when they seized the guns for Kim Gardner's political prosecution of the McCloskeys. On top of that, the Kyle Rittenhouse being trigger-happy thing is ridiculous. Kyle fired the necessary amount of shots and stopped firing. He didn't fire. It's all on video on people when they put their hands up. He was incredibly disciplined in his actions and using the minimum amount of force necessary for him to avoid his gun being taken away or being shot by Gage Grosskreutz. So no, you're just wrong in every possible way. It's ridiculous. And again, why are we talking so much about Black Lives Matter riots? Why are we gotta hear about how this is a targeting of Black Lives Matter protests? We can't riot and steal TVs for civil liberties or whatever because of this. Not everything is about your movement. Not everything is about you. Calm down.
Under this law, Joy, anyone who kills in self-defense is presumed to have acted lawfully, except if you use self-defense against a police officer, then you still go to jail.
Anyone who kills in self-defense by their very nature acted lawfully. Self-defense is a principle codified in law. So this guy's not saying anything. I don't know if you guys understand what I mean. So the Kyle Rittenhouse case, he argued self-defense, and then at the trial, he was found not guilty, so that self-defense is justified because he successfully argued self-defense. That's what they're angry about. They want the person, the accused, to have the burden of proof in order to prove that they acted in self-defense, which is ridiculous. And contrary to what these people say about the burden of proof shifting to the defendant in self-defense cases, that is not the case. Typically, you have to present some minimum argumentation to show that you acted in self-defense or show that that's at least a valid option to present at trial, and then the burden of proof is always on the prosecution. So what they're saying is just not true. I also want to point out that the constant references of Kyle Rittenhouse are really getting on my nerves because we're talking about duty to flee, no duty to flee, and all that stuff, but that does not apply to Kyle Rittenhouse. Kyle Rittenhouse retreated, presumably in any state where you act in a way after you exhaust all reasonable options, which Kyle Rittenhouse did. You should be able to defend yourself. Rittenhouse's defense should be valid anywhere. If somebody is against Kyle Rittenhouse's self-defense claims, they are by their very nature against self-defense. He did retreat. He only fired as his last possible option. It's all on video, yet these people keep bringing him up as an example of like a stand your ground or a vigilante or some such nonsense.
Joy, I agree with you. The only right thing about this proposed law is its title, Bill 666. It advances the devil's work.
The devil's work. You know, he missed a golden opportunity to say it advances the white devil's work.
I mean, it is a lynch law. I mean, it is a lynch law. I mean, it is a lynch law.
It is a lynch law. I like how Joy Reid is struggling to get the words out herself. She knows that what she's saying is so ridiculous and stupid that even it's given her pause of all people. And Joy Reid has had some terrible takes on her show just last week. This might be the third worst thing that she said in the last 10 days on that program.
You started something that I would love for you to continue. Missouri is thought of as not the South. But this is a state that has had a lot of active Klan activity after the Civil War. This is not a state that is not the South. You know what I mean? It is so similar.
Joy, you're absolutely right. There is a reason why for the Ferguson uprising is part of what shocked the world over 6 years ago.
Now, during the rest of this segment, they go into all the beats that you would expect in a segment like this. They talk about how the Klan was once active in the state of Missouri. They talk about Michael Brown. By the way, a 100% justified shooting. This is one of the Michael Brown activists, somebody who should be nowhere near a TV program because they can't read 8 pages of a document. But then again, Joy Reid, the host of this program, couldn't be bothered to read 1 page, 1 paragraph accurately, so maybe she is in the right place because that's really what this show is all about. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Do you think this law actually legalizes racist murders? Or do you think it's a self-defense protection that may or may not go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments of the video. If you liked the video, show me, leave a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias. You can support me via the short links in the description box. This has been me talking about Joy Reid spazzing out related to a stand your ground law or a self-defense law. Till next time.